I'm Cher Miller.
I'm Rob Dietz.
And I'm Jason Bradford. Welcome to Crazy Town, where the Professor Pangloss, chair of cherry-picked bullshittery, is the most prized academic position in the country.
Hi, this is Crazy Town producer Melody Allison. Thanks for listening. Here in Season 5, we're exploring false prophets and the dangerous messages they're so intent on spreading. If you like what you're hearing, please let some friends know about this episode, or the podcast in general. Now, on to the show.
Guys, I know we're going to be talking about false prophets this season, and I'm super excited to get into the first, meat of the season show here. I have to say, though, I'm feeling a little bit better about the future and our possibility. Yeah. I was up past my bedtime last night.
That's no wonder you're feeling better.
Usually that makes me feel worse. Huh?
Well, yeah. I mean, 10 p.m., okay?
Okay, right. Yeah. I forgot you're a farmer.
Yeah, well, I'm just middle-aged. Anyhow, I was asking ChatGPT about everything I've been worried about. And
wait, what's ChatGPT?
It's that neural natural language AI,
artificial intelligence guru that tells you everything. You need to know.
You just like talk to it and it tells you shit.
It's comforting. And so I asked it this question: do you think human progress will continue in the 21st century?
Okay.
No wonder you couldn't sleep with a question like that.
What did it say?
No, it helped me sleep because it gave me a great answer. It says, it is hard to predict the future, but it's likely that human progress will continue in the 21st century.
Sweet.
Humans have made tremendous progress over the course of history, and there is no reason to believe that this progress will come to a halt. In fact, many people believe that the pace of progress will only continue to accelerate in the 21st century due to advances in technology and science. This is so good to hear.
You really didn't need all this lead up to an AI to tell you this. You could have just gone over to Harvard or something and talked to Steven Pinker.
Well, I bet the AI read all this stuff. That's the only way it's going to get this.
I'm glad you brought up Steven Pinker because actually he's the guy that we're going to dive into first for this season.
Wow, I had no idea.
You're shocked. You're shocked. But just to be clear, that really was from ChatGPT, wasn't it?
No, GPT, right?
ChatGPT.
GTP, that's like some kind of motocross race or something.
It doesn't matter. It's the freaking AI everyone's using right now as their best friend.
Okay.
Their only friend, really. Okay, but before we get into why we picked Steven Pinker, right, as a false prophet, I just want to give our listeners a little background on the guy, okay?
Yeah.
Brief personal history, not going to get a lot of detail, but here's some salient facts about him. He's Canadian.
Nice.
So he always says "about," all the time.
Yeah.
He spells things weird. Probably
I love
with
Canadians.
U's.
He speaks French probably somewhat.
Coolest flag in the world, I think. Mm-hmm. The maple leaf.
Yeah, so he was born in Montreal in a community of Jewish refugees, and his grandmother survived a pogrom somewhere in Europe. His grandfather's entire family was killed during the Holocaust. Ugh. His father grew up pretty poor. Pinker described it as the most oppressive immigrant poverty. But eventually, several of the men of Pinker's dad's generation had kind of been able to grow out of that poverty and had flourishing businesses. Pinker thought of himself early on. He actually called himself like a Bakunin sort of anarchist type, you know.
Bakunin? What is that? Is it like a raccoon? What? I don't know this term.
Basically the guy who actually we've talked about mutual aid before is sort of behind these concepts of mutual aid and sort of anarchic communities.
Okay.
But in any case, he had this seminal event that happened when he was a teenager. I think he was 15 years old. The police in Montreal went on strike.
Yeah.
And in a matter of hours, he talked about how banks got robbed, people were killed, all the crime happened.
Or stabbings and blood in the streets.
Chaos in the streets. And he's like, I don't like this anarchic shit at all anymore, man. Right?
Okay, well, then, he rises through the ranks of academia. He gets a PhD in experimental psychology from Harvard in 1979.
You're pronouncing that wrong. It's Harvard. I believe.
Sorry about that. We can edit that out. He first became famous for his work on linguistics, and he taught at just like unbelievable, prestigious places like Harvard,
That's Harvard.
Stanford,
Stanford.
and MIT. And then returned to Harvard in 2003 as a, get this, full professor.
Wow, full.
Full.
He had a big dinner, I guess.
Yes. And he has written 16 books, the best known of which include The Better Angels of Our Nature, The Blank Slate, and Enlightenment Now. And so I'm kind of making fun of all this, but admit it, guys, he's smarter than us. He's more well-known and famous and richer than us, and he has better hair.
Yeah, I mean, have you seen pictures of the dude?
Unbelievable.
Einsteinian.
It's fantastic.
I gotta say, there's some parallels between Pinker and my dad. My dad has this sort of wild Einstein hair too.
You could go there. Your hair's fantastic.
I could go there eventually,
my God.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
What was that last book? Enlightenment Now? That reminds me of the Seinfeld thing. Remember, we have the Do the Opposite section where George Costanza does our opening.
Oh, right, Frank Costanza.
But his dad, Frank Costanza,
Serenity now!
Give me serenity now! Enlightenment now! That's what Pinker probably has a TED Talk where he gets up and does enlightenment now!
yeah, something like that.
Well, it's not just that he's a professor and that he went through all this stuff growing up, but he's got some reputation. I mean, in 2004, Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Prospect magazine, maybe that's a little less prestigious than Time, but still, they got him as number 3 on their list of 2013 world thinkers. He got this list that was compiled from 10,000 votes in hundreds of countries. So, I mean, this guy's known all over the world as a public pundit of, well, I guess we'll get into what he's pundicizing.
Well,
punditing.
Jason, you're not the only one who likes to play with Chat GTP.
How late were you up?
2, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
I asked it, and I'm not making this up. I asked Chat GTP, who is the most important thinker alive today? And guess what? Pinker was on the list.
Oh my gosh.
One of 5 names on the list that was given to me. So we know the guy's legit, right?
This brings me to understanding just how ignorant I am. Because until we decided to do Pinker for this episode, I knew a little bit about it, but I wasn't real familiar with who he was.
But I bet you were familiar with a lot of his arguments. And that's what I think we should talk about, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to put them in, encapsulate them in as condensed fashion as I possibly can, okay? And hopefully
You got 16 books, man. How are you going to do justice?
Serenity now!
That summarizes it.
Yeah, that's it. Basically, this is what it boils down to. Things have never been better, right? And they're only likely to progress further as long as we hold on to the principles of the Enlightenment, right? So his thesis basically is, if you look at human quality of life by all measurements, the violence, wars, life expectancy, absolute poverty, all that stuff is better than it's ever been in human history.
Well, especially in the movies, the violence has gotten awesome.
It's just CGI stuff.
I know.
Incredible.
You can take so many hits nowadays in movies.
Well, that's
and
what
just
I mean.
Keep
They
fighting.
don't actually get hit. It's all fake.
Look at a John Wick movie compared to something that came out in the 80s or 90s. I mean, he's just shooting 27 people in 3 seconds. It's incredible.
Yeah. I'm sure that this is what Pinker was referring to. And pessimists, I'm sure he would call us pessimists.
Yeah.
We're just delusional misanthropes, because we don't recognize all that.
That's sometimes people ask me about my co-hosts, and that's what I tell them. They're delusional misanthropes.
You fit perfectly with us. Well, okay. So the key, he emphasizes is the elements of the Enlightenment. He just loves the Enlightenment. Okay. You got reason, you've got science, you've got humanism, and you've got this notion of progress, that it's possible for us to continually improve on the world and on our place in it. All those ideas are so important to him. And so he believes that, quote, in the Enlightenment vision, that by understanding our world, that the world is intelligible, that we can understand it, that progress in understanding and therefore progress in rational action are possible, including potently ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of repetition there.
That's pretty circular, isn't it? Because I believe in this is the thing I believe in.
But there is, I think that last bit is an important nugget, which is, and he's gotten some criticism for this, which is we can use science and reason to actually understand our own behavior well enough that we could actually, almost see it, study it like other things in the physical world,
Sure.
having physical properties, right?
Yeah. Well, I kind of get that,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah, I'm a scientist. I think understanding ourselves is important. And we did a whole season on trying to understand our human psychology
Sure.
and stuff and our biases. And
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's interesting you bring up biases, because one of the other key things about Pinker that I read is that he rejects the notion that we're an irrational species and that we can continue to achieve this progress or improve on things as long as we govern ourselves appropriately. And that premise really struck me because I've been looking into behavioral economics for a bunch of years, and one of the guiding notions there is to recognize our
Right.
irrationalities. In fact, Dan Ariely is probably the most famous author professor in that field, and he wrote this great book, Predictably Irrational, about the ways we could work with our environment, work with our institutions, as long as we understand that we as people have these irrational tendencies. That's pretty opposite to what Pinker's.
Well, I think he said that individually we can be irrational, but collectively, if we put the right rules in place for our behavior, we can collectively act rationally.
okay.
So
So there's some balance there maybe, but he really emphasizes this, that
he has
we
this aspirational vision,
Yeah.
in the Enlightenment, right?
Yeah.
If we just use science and reason and logic and humanism, care
Yeah.
for people, there is no limit, in a sense, to our ability to progress and to flourish, right, as a species.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, very human-centered,
Yeah.
right, all this stuff. There's really no mention of the rest of the natural world. Now, I don't think we want to spend a lot of time, critiquing a lot of these arguments. There's lots of people who have done that stuff. He's actually had a lot of back and forth with critics over the years. People have criticized him for cherry picking facts, relying on questionable, single sources to make his arguments, around how many people died from violence, for example. And people have really gone after him for what seems like this sort of tone deafness or lack of consideration for the fact that there are billions of people that are really suffering in the world right now. So, we're not going to spend a lot of time getting into that stuff. I think there are others like George Monbiot, Jason Hickel, who've done a great job of sort of taking him to task for some of these things. We'll put some links into our show notes. And there's actually a great cartoon that we're going to include as well, which is really great.
I was laughing at it when you showed me that.
Yeah. Just take you to the extreme, his sort of tone deafness about people suffering.
Yeah. Well, I want to say that I agree with the inclination. Pinker's putting forth this pretty damn positive vision that I kind of like it, and I want to.
Yeah.
Of course, we want to preserve Enlightenment values. Of course, we want to hang on to the great things that humanity has done. That's a really nice headspace to live in, right?
And to work for as best we can. I agree with that. I mean, it's we should try to preserve these things. I get nervous when it looks like we're going to lose them too.
Yeah. And so I liked it, but it seems like it's really worth delving into to try to examine okay, well, sure, we want to be with you and think that things are going to progress, but can we also look at some of the possibilities of what might prevent that from happening?
Yeah, I mean, he really is an advocate of rationality, and I get it. I am too, but he seems to have this sort of rosy tinted glasses view on how people actually interact in the real world. So here's a quote: "We achieve rationality by implementing rules for the community that make us collectively more rational than any of us are individually. People make up for one another's biases by being able to criticize them. People air their disagreements, and the person with the strongest position prevails. People subject their beliefs to empirical tests."
I'm thinking he's never lived in an intentional community.
Or gone online once to Twitter.
I mean, that's a nice sentiment that the strongest position prevails, but often it's the person who has the most social power prevails, right?
Yeah.
It's not No, oh, well, that sounds like a great argument. Let me just give up the thing I was fighting for.
Yeah.
Well, in strongest position, you can interpret that in a couple of ways. One is strongest based upon fact-based, science-based, or whatever. Or strongest could be the loudest motherfucker in the room, insisting that their position is the right one.
Or the most annoying and persistent. And you finally just give up and say, just let them have what they want. I'm tired. I got to go to bed. It's 10.
Yeah. Right. Jason's never getting any of his stuff on the agenda because he's asleep before the meeting even gets going.
Well, and I think there are some scary implications for this idea of having rules, right? Implementing rules for the community. It's like, well, who gets to decide those rules? What are those rules? You could see how somebody could take a position to say the rational, the fact-based, the scientific-based position is actually that the world is flat, right? Like, and we're gonna pose those rules because we have power to do that.
So what's wrong with that again?
There's nothing wrong with that. I was using it as a positive example.
Okay,
Sorry.
good.
Yeah. It's just, to me, like alarm bells go off when I hear about people talking about implementing rules.
Right. Never
on
once
behavior.
has a rule backfired or you had unintended consequences
Mm-hmm.
or
people in power create rules to maintain their power.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you think about the human brain and how it evolved in this sort of context of, tribal affiliation and modestly sized groups where a lot of what happens is that the rules, quote unquote, are really about social norms and trust and relationships that are lifelong. And so it's not nearly as formal, like how people come to agreements and how people hold other people accountable and all this. And it's like our brain was set up and evolved in a different time and place and different social structure. So it almost feels like we struggle so much because we're kind of a misfit between how we evolved and now these big institutions, these complex questions that we're having to deal with. And I don't think he grapples with that at all.
Yeah. The good news is that he's got some great solutions for environmental protection.
Okay.
I'm going to share with you.
Thank you.
So he argued that instead of renouncing technology and reverting to pre-industrial revolution standards of living, we can, quote unquote, treat environmental protection as a problem to be solved. How can people live safe, comfortable, and stimulating lives with the least possible pollution and loss of natural habitats? So that's all we got to do is just ask that question. And
thank God somebody has
Wow.
finally said, let's treat these environmental things as problems.
And so like we were talking about like starting like some kind of government program or agency that would deal with like maybe like the river, like Cuyahoga River's on fire.
Are you talking like
or-
an environmental agency that would protect
right.
a protection environment agency?
Like maybe
an agency?
like the environment. And then, also what if you want clean water? Like, could you like pass a law about that?
So you're saying like polluted water is a problem that could be solved?
We could look into that.
So you could pass a law?
Congress could have an act of some kind about
This could
water.
happen one day? We could get like a water act, a
that's
clean
clean.
water act.
what about air?
Well, that's the other thing. Like maybe you're coughing a lot and there's pollution and something like that, and there's smokestacks or there's tailpipes. So you could do something about dirty air and you could try to clean the air.
My mind's blown, guys.
It's open to a whole new
I
perspective.
never considered this, something like
There's
this
a
before.
biodiversity crisis too. So you could worry about endangered species and maybe act upon that.
Like you could pass an act?
Yeah, you could.
An endangered species act?
I bet you could. I bet you could do that.
That's crazy.
Wow.
So the point here obviously is, dude, yeah, people have been working on trying to solve environmental problems for a long time. But
can
where
treat
are
them.
we?
We can treat them as a problem to be solved.
Did we belabor that point well enough for everybody?
Let's listen to Pinker. He's top thinker of the world. I mean, one of the top 5.
Well, here's how you know that he's a top thinker. This is my favorite, is that according to Pinker, when you want to talk about the economy,
Okay.
we need to decouple productivity from resources. Everything's got to be dense. You just you get more bang for the buck, and he's all about dematerialization. Use technology, of course, to do more with less. Just as how we've been doing the past bunch of
industrial farming. It's more sustainable because it requires less farmland, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk to my wife about dinner tonight. I think she expects tacos, but I'm gonna dematerialize those.
Yeah, I think you should.
So I'm gonna make them a lot less dense and calorically.
No, they need to be more dense.
Right.
They need to be more dense.
Dense with information.
They're okay. Yeah, it's the information of the taco that I want. I'm gonna show her a recipe. I'm gonna say, look. this is taco information. Is this dense enough for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. She'll probably clobber me with something dense.
Well, it's crazy because he has this other thing. Here's a quote. He says, it's a fallacy to think that people need resources in the first place. They need ways of growing food, moving around, lighting their homes, displaying information, and other sources of well-being. They satisfy these needs. Here we go, Jason, with your stuff. They satisfy these needs with ideas, with recipes, formulas, techniques, blueprints, and algorithms for manipulating the physical world to give them what they want. The human mind, with its recursive combinatorial power, those are some Harvard words out there, can explore an infinite space of ideas and is not limited by the quantity of a particular kind of stuff on the ground.
Boy, Kristen's going to be dreaming of tacos. I mean, because she won't have any in like the physical space, but I'll show her recipes.
Yeah.
There'll be lots of ideas of tacos. And when she goes to sleep, there'll be an infinite combinatorialness of tacos.
Recursive. Don't forget the recursive part.
There'll be recursive tacos in her head. And she will be mad at me and she will probably kick me in the middle of the night and elbow me.
She will love you for giving her such a dense, wonderful food experience. Thanks, Stephen, for that.
Right, people don't need resources. They just need ways of...
Yeah. I love that. Let's just substitute the word ways for resources, and suddenly it's okay.
There's formulas and blueprints.
Look,
and algorithms. What the fuck?
I've seen this argument so often.
This is mainstream economics, actually.
This is actually mainstream economics.
And it drives me nuts. Like, I get it. Of course, oil is just a greasy liquid if we don't understand how to use it. We don't have some recipe for making it work. But it doesn't matter if you have that recipe and you don't have the goddamn oil. You need them both. Stop pretending like we don't have gifts from nature.
I mean, just think about that. It is a fallacy to think that people need resources in the first place. Can we just stop right there, dude? Like,
how does anyone take him seriously?
How do you take someone seriously when they say that?
I don't understand.
The dude fucking teaches
Why is he at
Harvard,
MIT, Stanford? He's got like...
Does one of those Harvard students raise their hand and say, what did you eat for breakfast this morning, professor? And what does he say? Well, it's a fallacy to think that it was food.
It was the idea of food.
I had an excellent recipe.
I thought about Cheerios.
The guy has had a lot of criticism over the years.
How's he take it?
We're not the first ones to pick on him, including people who have pushed back on his rosy view of progress and kind of his spin on optimism. He has not taken it well.
He hasn't taken it well. He's got an ego, does he?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Look, I was struck by reading this interview with him where the guy went to visit him in his house in Cape Cod and, walks in his house and described what he sees. And of course, the man has done very well for himself, sold a lot of books,
Yeah, 16.
Nice, fancy house with lots of photos of himself. And paintings of himself on the walls.
So that's a tell, isn't it?
It's sort of like our studio here where we've just plastered the walls with pictures of ourselves.
Oh, there's a picture of me and my two boys and my wife put
Yeah, but no, I want a picture of me.
Okay.
Not you.
All right. We got to get one.
Oh,
okay.
One?
I got a few in my backpack. I can hand out to you.
Thank you.
All right, let's stop picking on the man. What are you?
No, I'm going to keep picking on him. We'll get back to the point. So you asked, how has he taken to his criticism? Well, he characterizes the environmental movement as eco-pessimism. So I think we're slowly working our way up on that list.
Yeah.
We're talking about the top 5, thinkers in the world.
Yeah.
Top 5 eco-pessimists. If we work hard at this, guys, we might get there. Right? He describes, these eco-pessimists as being laced with misanthropy, including an indifference to starvation, an indulgence in ghoulish fantasies of a depopulated planet, and Nazi-like comparison of human beings to vermin, pathogens, and cancer.
That's dropping the nuclear bomb, right? Every environmentalist is a Nazi.
Yeah, it's like what is that Godwin's law?
Yeah,
like, if you don't like the criticism that you're getting, you call them a Nazi.
That's really disappointing. I mean, eco-pessimism, okay. I mean, that term kind of could ring. There's a lot of doom and gloomers in the environmental movement, sure. But it's precisely because you're worried about things like starvation or things like loss of topsoil or an unlivable climate that you try to fight these issues. It's not because you're in favor of it.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
It's love.
I know.
It's loving what we see in the world, not just other human beings, other creatures that we share this planet with, right?
Yeah.
See, calling us misanthropes because we're concerned.
It's so absurd.
Yeah.
It's really sad. The guy's kind of ends up being a little pathetic at this point.
Well, but he proves his point. He takes it even farther and argues that apocalyptic predictions have failed to come true over and over and over again. And that means that, quote, humanity has miraculously escaped from certain death again and again, like a Hollywood action hero, or there's a fundamental flaw in eco-pessimist thinking. I don't know what apocalyptic predictions he's talking about, but certainly we're having problems environmentally. I mean, you just look at the data. I mean, he claims to be a data guy and wants to, look at that for charting the progress that we're making. Well, yeah, humanity's made a lot of progress, but it clearly coming at the cost of some environmental degradation.
This is very standard kind of stuff. The arguments we always have from people who try to argue that there aren't limits. They say, well, Malthus was wrong. It's like, it's the same thing. It's like, because this one person, you straw man cherry pick one thing and say they didn't get exactly the timing right or whatever it was.
Right.
It dismisses the entire argument. These things are no longer concerned. So just because, who knows what apocalyptic predictions, he's talking about, the end of the world completely, just because that didn't happen, therefore all these concerns aren't valid. It's pretty weak intellectual arguments, I gotta say.
Yeah.
I'm going to share something that really, really blew my mind, which was, I talked about that interview that this guy, David Marchese from New York Times did with him, where he saw the photos of him in his house.
Yeah.
And Marchese asked him a question. He said, I don't think I'm alone in feeling that rising authoritarianism, the pandemic, and the climate crisis, among other things, are signs that we're going to hell in a handbasket. Is that irrational of me? And this was Pinker's response. He said, it is not irrational to identify genuine threats to our well-being. Good. It is irrational to interpret a number of crises occurring at the same time as signs that we're doomed. It's a statistical phenomenon that when events are randomly sprinkled in time, they cluster. That sounds paradoxical, but unless you have a non-random process that spaced them apart, we're going to have a crisis every 6 months, but we're never going to have 2 crises in a month. Events cluster. That's what random events will do, right? So it's like, this is just random, We've got California on fire or then flooded, we've got like rising inequality. We've got people marching on the Capitol. Like we've got hunger. We've got war. Like,
I got topsoil erosion. We got ocean acidification.
Biodiversity.
I wonder
loss.
if you were, let's say you were in World War II and your city's being attacked and a bomb fell on your city and these soldiers came through firing at you. Would that be a random statistical clustering or could they be related somehow?
Well, what's funny is he dismisses like environmental quote unquote prediction to disaster. But what's interesting is if you look at one of the most famous set of scenarios, the limits to growth, and you have that lens on what happens to systems when they start to break down, what do you get? You get the polycrisis. You get a whole bunch of stresses that build up and things start breaking here and there and snapping and becoming unstable. Things that were once more stable become chaotic in their dynamics, et cetera, et cetera. Systems at the brink end up having a bunch of bad things happen at once.
And life is systems. I mean, clearly the guy's no ecologist, right? So there are interactions that happen, right?
Yeah.
There are causal effects. There are relationships between things. These are not random events that just, we got bad luck this
Those 9
century.
planetary boundaries happen to be broken all at once. Shit, how did that happen? How did we break all 9 about back to back?
What a weird coincidence.
It's a weird coincidence. Overshoot leads to breaking all these boundaries at the same fucking time.
Put your statistical anomalies away and calm down, okay?
Not just eco-pessimism.
Those 9 boundaries will all just shrink back together or something.
Yeah.
I know we're going to get into this, but God, this drives me nuts. The failure to attribute our progress to anything other than our own brilliant minds. Like it didn't come at the price of anything in nature.
Okay, so there's something very special about this season is that I really worked hard to develop a taxonomy, the first ever taxonomy of the false prophet species, the very species of false prophets. And I'm not saying it's the first.
It's seminal work.
It's a seminal work because there's never been a taxonomic
You keep
treatment
using
of
that word. I'm not sure you know what it means.
But I'm very excited about it, and it hasn't been quite published yet. It'll get online. It's
going through peer review process.
But by the time the show is YouTube. By the time the show is released, hopefully it'll be out there for everyone to run through the taxonomy. And part of a taxonomic treatment is a dichotomous key.
I remember doing those. Like you want to identify plants, and it asks you 2 questions.
Yeah,
it's like a choose your own adventure.
Are the leaves green or red?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's like the mushroom book that we're using recently.
Yeah, exactly.
Try to identify the mushroom species.
Okay, so dichotomous key just asks you a series of questions, and it's like, is it this or this? And it goes different directions, and you eventually like come out and you know what it is. So I ran Pinker through this, and it turns out that he has traits of 3 different species. Now you say, how's that possible? Well, this often happens is there are hybrid swarms out there of false prophets.
And Pinker may be special among the
Well, we're going to
false
see.
prophets.
We'll go through our others and see what traits they have.
Okay, so let me go through the three species I think that that has bred him.
Okay.
So he's obviously a man shiller. And a man shiller is a high-status professional well paid to gaslight you into believing the shit cakes you are seeing everywhere are actually made of chocolate. And it does include a number of recognized subspecies that are easily distinguished by their profession. We'll get into, But anyway, he's definitely a man shiller. He also, though, is a double downer. And this is a person who, after reviewing all
We're Debbie Downers.
Right.
He's a double
downer.
Yes.
Okay.
A person who, after reviewing all the evidence that we are on a completely unsustainable path, decides the best and only action is to do much more of what has gotten us into this mess.
Right.
Okay? And so they bum you out in 2 ways. It's a double entendre. They bum you out when they talk to you about what's wrong, but then they also bum you out because they have nothing useful to say about it. So he's a bit of a double downer. And then he is also has elements of what are called industrial breatharians. And so
he makes tacos.
Yeah, exactly. You know what you guys know what breatharianism is?
Yeah, that's where you're not a vegetarian, you're not an omnivore. You can survive by eating only the air.
Well, you can sunshine basically. You're almost like a plant, I guess. You can breathe and you need sunshine. If you don't have light, you die. Okay.
So he needs light. So he's like an anti-vampire.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's got elements of all 3 of those. But they envision a richer, non-molecular American Airlines, Archer Downey Midlands, and Bed Bath and Beyond.
Non-molecular Bed Bath and Beyond. What do they sell? Dreams?
I don't know.
That's the Beyond part.
Yeah.
It's all Beyond. They just got rid of the bed and the bath part.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, each one of our shows will go through the taxonomic key for our guests.
Okay, so here we are, giving this guy a bit of a hard time.
A little bit.
Getting a little pissed off at some of the stupid shit that he says.
I'm so angry.
Adding a veneer of sort of scientific, botanistic treatment, to him as you just did.
Yes.
But the truth is, he's a human being, right? And I actually feel a little bit of compassion for him. A little bit.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
And sadness for him because it feels like a bit of this sort of desperate form of denialism wrapped in this cloak of optimism that he's putting out into the world.
Yes.
And it's like, hiding this deep fear that I think sits in the guy. Here I am. I mean, I'm psychoanalyzing the dude. I never met him. I'm not a...
But he's so prolific and he has something. You can kind of see through it all. It ends up, you can see what kind of angst he has and pain and fear.
Well, I remember going down that path, like so wanting to be a techno-optimist and, that we're going to overcome all this. And then watching the trends and looking at the reality and reading and studying and kind of, well, I don't think I can be in that space because it's not commensurate with reality.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to do away with my empathy for a second and go back to what you were talking about. You know, you're talking to him about him being a man chiller.
Yeah.
I can understand the desire. Maybe we want to talk a little bit more about that in a second.
Okay.
You know, the kind of what's driving maybe this belief system, you know. But the truth of the matter is the guy he's not an original thinker.
No.
He cherry picks facts. He can act incredibly smug in his interactions, and he supports a predominant view of elites. You know, there's a writer named Pankaj Mishra who called Pinker a member of the intellectual service class, which shuffles around justifying the positions and soothing the moral sensitivities of society's winners.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like his response to critics around, you know, growing inequality is like, well, that's not really an issue, you know, like it's so what that some of these guys are becoming billionaires and 100 billionaires or whatever.
Right.
You know, what matters is your absolute wealth, which, by the way, is not true in terms of human behavior. Relative status is actually an incredibly important driver of people's sense of well-being. But, you know, that's just carrying water for these motherfuckers.
Yeah.
And so there's not only like intellectual laziness in some ways, there's not a lot of original thinking here, but it's, just fucking bootlicker.
You realize a lot of our big academic institutions, that's what they end up hiring people to do. It's kind of scary. I mean, there's plenty of great people who are original thinkers, and that because they have tenure and freedom of thought, they say some pretty amazing things and are critics. But a good part of the academy is doing the man-shilling job.
Yeah.
Well, I worry that the three of us will come across as kind of holier than thou and obnoxious for piling on somebody. So let me go back for just a minute to the empathy part of this. There was that interview you had talked about with David Marchese. Marchese asked him if there was anything that Pinker thought he was irrational about himself. And I really like Pinker's answer. He said, I'm irrational about bike riding and eating meat. So first of all, eating meat, we know he can get rid of that because he can just eat air or whatever.
Right, you know,
right.
Yeah, the idea of meat, just smell something.
But I love that he thinks he's irrational about riding bikes. I think that's the most rational thing he does. We love bikes. Bikes, that's the most efficient form of transportation humans have ever invented, from a energy input to distance gained. It's he's totally rational there.
But it is pretty telling that he could only spot those two things as like signs that he's irrational. You know?
I have so many irrationalities. I mean, that would be the rest of our season if I just listed them.
You know, there was this thing where you were talking about Asher, his history where he saw the cops basically on strike and then mayhem in the streets of Montreal. Yeah. And it sort of made him fear sort of the darker side of human nature. And I think that's a lot of what's going on is if the Enlightenment, you know, if there are limits to growth, if progress doesn't continue, then it breaks down into this horrible Hobbesian, you know, fight for individuals, and Pythagoreanism really doesn't work that well. I think he's just scared of this. He's got this death anxiety in a sense. And as much as he talks about, you know, evolutionary psychology, I also think he has a narrow view of human nature where there's plenty of cooperativeness in humans. And we had some good episodes on that. God, a couple of seasons back, we had one on self-domestication about how we're kind of a eusocial species. And there's a lot of our evolutionary history that is about us getting together and cooperating. But again, it's a scale thing. Like, it's hard to have us be like that in this modern world where we live in groups of, you know, millions and there's a lot of strangers. So we're kind of a mismatch here. And that's a problem, obviously. And then we had a whole episode on sort of terror management theory. So I see him I see the kind of the hurt person there, but also he ends up acting like a jackass a lot, which pisses you off.
Well, yeah, I mean, and he's referred to himself as a Hobbesian, for an optimist, somebody who's basically known for espousing optimism.
Right. It's ironic.
For giving people a sense of hope, and that look at all the progress that we've made, which we would agree. Like, if you look at it, you know, I mean, yes, he cherry picks data, but there's a lot of data that shows that material conditions for humans, you know, has grown. I like modern medicine.
I love a lot of
it. It's a great fucking thing.
I know. I find myself nodding with a lot of his stuff and then just going, why don't you just shut up about this other stuff and your ignorance about what created these material conditions. That's what pisses me off.
But that's the thing, is that there's this weird gap between, like, you know, putting out this picture, right, this optimistic vision, when kind of at the heart of it, he doesn't actually trust humans.
No, he doesn't.
On some level,
But
right?
Serenity now.
But we've discussed this, right? Like high energy modernity was the term
Right.
that you found from somebody, Stephen
Thomas
Quilly.
Love, yeah.
Tom Love. Yeah, and it's like, we appreciate it. Right? Like,
Right.
amazing gratitude for
Yeah.
modern
I
dentistry
love
and for...
Lidocaine's freaking rocks.
Right. We're
So does Valium.
It's winter. We're sitting in a nice warm room at the moment. It's incredible.
The lights on, and we got electricity
But
power on mics.
have the gratitude. Just don't miss, attribute where it came from.
Well, that's the thing, is he divorced from the physical realities that
Right.
created these. And I think the big takeaway here, the big key here is that for me, and a big part of the reason I wanted to talk about Pinker is this, which is, let's say we share as values a strong desire to maintain the gains of the Enlightenment.
Yeah,
right?
I do.
Scientific advancement.
I don't want to burn witches anymore.
Our capacity to try to understand the world, to continue to evolve our thinking, to try to organize ourselves in a way where he talked about humanistic tendencies as well, right? Like, I think that there are a lot of common values there. The problem is that he has taken the human being and divorced the human being from the world. So not recognizing that the gains that have been made in recent centuries have been made on the back of ancient sunlight, burning ancient sunlight, ancient energy that gave us this incredible surplus and bounty, right? And that's given us the capacity to provide rights for more people, to provide education for more people, to improve quality of life, all these things, not equitably distributed, with an economic system that's fucked up, and, exploitation that's probably going to send us over a cliff. Okay.
Yep.
And if we want to hold on to those things, we need to recognize that they were done in a sense on the sort of not idealized conditions, but with a big fucking tailwind behind us, right?
Yeah.
So that wind stops, or in fact, we have a headwind.
Yeah.
How do we work on maintaining those things when we are challenged? We are challenged in ways we haven't been challenged before. Guys like this scare me, because while they're espousing all these values and the things that they want to hold on to, their solution for holding on to them is to go, no,
I know.
about limits.
And then
let's look at the limits so we can actually face what we need to face, so we can try to ensure that these things are around. We're not the fucking misanthropes.
Right.
You're a misanthrope.
Yes,
You're in denial.
Exactly.
I'm not the misanthrope.
You're the misanthrope. I like that.
Okay, this is a good segue into a recurring feature that we're doing. This is the insufferability index, or as you've been trying to rename it, the douchebag coefficient. This is a little riff where we kind of give a 0 to 10 score based on it's kind of like how much would we want to hang out with this person and listen to the ideas that they have. And, like a Nelson Mandela would be really low on the insufferability. Like, you'd really want to hang out in here. And Tucker Carlson would be really high on the scale. You'd want to punch him in the face within the first 25 seconds.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of like we want to think about the intentions of the person. Are they malevolent or power hungry? Are they selfish? You want to think about their personality. Maybe they're could be a fun guy to get a beer with, but maybe they're just really mean. We want to think about their ideas. How far off the deep end are they? And then maybe you just have your own bias for this person. You like his hair or whatever.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So where are you guys on the Steven
After
Pinker?
the little rant I just went
Yeah,
on, I'm pretty high on the list there. I don't know, man. I mean, so you said Tucker Carlson is like a 9?
I mean, in my book, he'd probably be a 10. I really don't enjoy.
Yeah, like I like Tucker Carlson. I probably wouldn't even bother trying to have a conversation with that dude.
Outside of a class in martial arts, I've never punched anybody in my life, but I look at him as being really punchable.
Well, that's it. The other thing with Tucker Carlson is like there's no point in having a conversation with the dude. I don't think I'd be. So Pinker, I would say it might be interesting to like talk to the guy a little bit. Like I wouldn't just kick him in the nuts and walk away, right?
I'm glad you wouldn't.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but then again,
Yeah.
the dude has fucking paintings of himself in his own house.
I know. So that's where you can look at his personality. So the score that we've devised, there's three things. You look at intentions, personality, and ideas. Okay.
Look,
so
let me
just add the thing. You should add it. I added it up. I got a 5. Okay.
Oh, 5.
Pinker's a 5 to me. Okay. He's middle of the road douchebag.
You were able to run over it with your car and
Do you know
not
how
hit the
upset
tires.
all of these guys are going to be? Not to score high,
right.
to score like middle.
Oh, no, yeah,
because the last thing they want to be is mediocre. Any of these
He's
guys.
a mediocre
so
douchebag.
Pinker is probably really upset.
I mean,
he'd probably prefer me saying he's a 7 to you saying he's a 5.
I like that he's written all these books and he's a good writer.
Is he a good writer?
I could talk to him about that. I'm kind of with you, Jason. I think maybe I'd give him like a 6 after listening to your rant.
Yeah. I mean, you can give him an extra 1 because, he sounds like an asshole sometimes.
We got to hear from a share. Where are you on this?
6.5.
All right.
Oh, that's surprising after that. I can't wait to hear your rant
And
on a 10.
it's partly because I'm trying to leave some space for some of our other douchebags who are coming down the pike. You know?
Yeah. All right. Well,
Can't go too high
congratulations.
out the gate.
Congratulations, Pinker. You're just
Good job, Pinker.
You're just middle of the road.
Other podcasts ask for a lot of stuff. Buy their merch, join their Patreon, donate your left kidney. But we're just asking you to share the show. If you're like me and you find it funny and thought-provoking, then please tell 3 friends. Hit that share button and get some other people joining us in Crazy Town.
Every decision I've ever made in my entire life has been wrong. My life is the complete opposite of everything I want it to be.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
Okay, so we're talking doing the opposite of what Pinker's laid out. We talked about how it sort of seemed like there was this willful, desperate optimism that was being put out there that was, in a sense, maybe a form of denial of fears. And so I would just suggest that we all have to start by, in a sense, facing our fears, contending with the grief that we might have. There's lots of different ways that people do that. Practice meditation, get out in nature. There are also resources that are out there for people to do this and to do it collectively, not alone, especially in the context of thinking about the fears that we have about the climate crisis and the other issues that we're facing. So I would just suggest, folks check out Joanna Macy's the work that reconnects, for example, or something called the Good Grief Network, which is an online community for folks with resources.
That was started by Charlie Brown.
Yes, it was started.
Good grief.
And that's part of the reason why we have this show, because we also understand that as social creatures, we have to share our grief and concern, and it actually causes quite a bit of relief when we do.
Yeah, and maybe clarity of thinking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, you just mentioned Joanna Macy. I like the idea as we go through this season of false prophets, can we find somebody who's got a better message, sort of the opposite of them? And there's a guy we work with, I think you guys know pretty well, Richard Heinberg.
Oh, yeah, heard of him. How many books he got? He got 16?
He's close. I think he's 14 maybe at this point.
Yeah, and I don't think he has any photos or paintings of himself in his own house.
Oh,
sculptures are all over the place.
He doesn't have as much hair.
But he sees the material basis, which, of course, mostly fossil fueled, as a reason for why the Enlightenment values were able to be spread and why we've had this technological progress. So it's really worth reading his work to understand it's not just the mind, it's not just our recipes, it's the gifts that we've received. And his most recent book, which is called Power, it explores cooperation and social power, and he's got a really nuanced view on why it is that we behave the way we do. And so I would just like to point people to Richard as kind of I don't think he sets out to be an anti-Pinker, but his message is just much more in line with physical reality, ecology, a much broader brush than what Pinker provides.
Yeah, I a lot of what you're going to hear from folks like Pinker is, technology's solution. We got to double down on high tech over and over again. It's a real drumbeat. And of course, a lot of people that care about climate are into this camp. And I just think, be careful. We do a lot on this show to educate people about the limitations to a lot of what's being proposed. And so be skeptical of high tech and especially complex systems for management of getting things through. We really have, in many cases, limited scope to manage this complexity, which is what you learn from people like Joseph Tainer, et cetera. And so, especially as the energy surplus we've been relying on declines, that gets just more and more difficult to do. And we're going to cover this. And, Pinker's not the only guy that we're going to talk about this season that falls into this. So we'll cover this in more detail.
But an amazing opportunity here to do as I do instead of do the opposite. Get out there and ride your bike like Pinker
Yeah, like
does.
Pinker.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the last thing I guess I would say is that let's hold on to the same ideals. I think we share with Pinker, many values and ideals. I think a lot of our listeners probably share them as well. And so it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. What a weird expression.
Yeah.
But
let's not do that.
Never even came close to once doing that when
how do you
my
even
kid was
do
a
that?
baby.
Well, in the olden days, everyone would bathe prior to the baby, and the baby would be the last one in the family to bathe. And
No,
the
I
bathwater
get
was
it, but
dirty.
like literally, physically, how are you actually throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Like, how do you not notice that the baby's in there with the bathwater?
Yeah, that'd be pretty bad. It
Constantly?
means the baby's probably at the bottom, and you can't even see the baby.
This is the worst digression we've ever been on.
Strange expression.
I agree. It is a strange expression.
Yeah. In any case, I don't know. Well, shit, Melody, can you edit that? Too late. So the point is, if we're worried about how to maintain those and we see that we've got a reckoning coming, or we have to, like I was saying before, we don't have the wind at our back, we have the wind in our faces, we need to engage other people in this conversation, because I bet you it might be hard to have a conversation with people, helping them try to understand the complexity of all of these systems that are breaking down right now. And maybe they want to be in sort of denial about it too, but just cracking open the door for them to say, you care about these things, right? What are the things that we care about collectively together? How do we make sure that we can maintain those? Let's just say if I'm right, or there's a 10% chance that I'm right, and that we're going to be dealing with all kinds of limitations and issues in the future. How do we hold on to those things? Because if we're not having those conversations now, we're going to be in a world of hurt later. So please engage other people in that conversation as well.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you want others to consider these issues, then please share Crazy Town with your friends. Hit that share button in your podcast app, or just tell them face to face. Maybe you can start some much needed conversations and do some things together to get us out of Crazy Town. Thanks again for listening and sharing.
Agriculture is widely considered the most destructive activity on the planet. And by 2050, with another couple billion human mouths to feed, many are seeking ways to minimize the footprint of farming and their personal demands on our precious earth. With all this in mind, I was truly astounded to receive a copy of the newest edition of The Breatharian's Cookbook. This pseudo-culinary classic has been updated with the latest ideas on how to dematerialize the food system, one where recipes are enough and quote-unquote food isn't needed at all. Rob, Asher, I know you guys have been trying out the Breatharian's Cookbook this week.
Yeah.
Can you share maybe your favorite food concept and how you feel?
Yeah, I gotta say, I love the classic chocolate chip cookies. Imagining the smell of them cooking in my oven, their buttery texture, that outer crunch with the ooey gooey melted chocolate,
You're killing me.
and no inconvenience of having to add ingredients. I was it's so freaking mouth-watering with nothing in my actual mouth.
I was going more savory. I kept coming back again and again to the pulled pork sandwiches, which, I get to eat guilt-free as a Jew, and I'm down 20 pounds this week. It's pretty amazing.
Hey, thanks, guys. Those are some powerful testimonials. So I encourage listeners to order their copy today. We're talking about The Breatharian's Cookbook, where sustainability is imagined.
Crazy town, da, 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 crazy town.